I'm an autism awareness angel, making sure my wings protect the different, the stranger than. I'm an autism awareness angel. It's good, cause I'm cool with the unique behavior. I'm an autism awareness angel. Will you accept me? Cause I accept you. I'm an autism awareness angel, cause the view from the spectrum is a better point of view. The question at hand, are you...
Hello, I'm Tally, and welcome back to Autism 30. Today on our podcast, we are speaking with community member Mr. Zachary Protz. He is the son of Miss Jody Gilmore and Mr. Doug Protz, who you may have listened to on our first three-part podcast dated December 1st, 15th, and January 1st. Zach is 22 years old and was diagnosed with pervasive development disorder, not otherwise specified, which is on the autism spectrum. He's currently a student at Langara College studying philosophy and history and is enjoying his part-time job. Not only is he a keen learner, but he is also a brilliant actor, and you may have seen his performances in various venues all over the Lower Mainland. It is a true pleasure to have such a gentleman in our studio. Welcome, Zach.
Hi, good to be here. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Now we're just going to get right into it. What was your childhood like?
I was a bit of a spitfire when I was little. From about 2 to 5, I'd say I kept my mother and father quite busy. I'd say I sort of slowed down and matured quite a bit at around 6. I was homeschooled since I was about 8, I want to say.
Okay.
And, or no, maybe 7. No, 8. Yeah, 8. So I didn't really have like a circle of friends growing up so much. I mostly just had like individual friends, but
Okay.
we had lots of good times. So yeah, I'd say I had a fairly happy childhood.
Well, it sounds it. Now, in what way was your childhood different than the typical child?
I mean, again, I was homeschooled for about 8 years, so I didn't attend public school as a kid a lot. So I mostly hung out with other kids individually, with a couple of exceptions. But aside from that, I can't really think of anything that would be. I mean, when I was younger, I had a little bit of difficulty sort of interacting with other kids socially. It's not that I didn't want to, it's just I found it difficult.
Absolutely, and I know that's one of the signs of having autism.
Mm-hmm.
And did you know you had autism as a child?
I think my parents told me when I was about 6.
And how was that for you to hear?
Oh, yeah, that was brutal. I mean, when you're 6, you don't really know what it is precisely. And, when you're 6, you don't want to be different. So,
Okay.
like, just learning that I was different somehow was just, like, brutal. Like, oh, I'm not like all the other kids. I'm somehow lesser. And, yeah, I mean...
That must have affected you.
Oh yeah, that was.
So if you're saying you found it brutal, do you think that people should be informed of their autism? And who do you think that they should tell? Or do you think they should keep it confidential?
Like, do you think parents should tell their children if they have autism?
Yes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, they're going to have to figure it out at some point. And, having this kept from me for 2 years wasn't too much of a big deal. But if they had told me when I was 12, I think that would have felt kind of more like a betrayal.
Okay. And that's really interesting. So you say you found it brutal at the age of 6. Would you have liked to have been told even younger, or?
I think 6 was probably the correct move, because I believe I asked my mom, I said, "Mommy, I'm different, aren't I?" And she said, "Well, yes, you are."
And brilliant, might I add, but yes.
Okay.
And did you, as a child, how did autism affect you?
I just had a lot of trouble sort of interacting with other kids. Like, kids move really fast and like what they're doing, and I kind of found it hard to, like, if other kids were playing a game, to just sort of jump in. And like, I wasn't really comfortable like asking like, oh, hey, can I play? So
Okay, and you're talking basically about the standard or typical things, I should say, because everybody on the autism spectrum is different. But you're talking about the difficulty in understanding social communication.
yeah, I'd say so.
And I know as a teen, things must have been very different, though, however.
Oh yeah, I had it pretty much figured out as a teenager, I think. So
And around what age did you feel that you started to figure out social communication?
I mean, I always had it to a degree. Like, when I was younger, I would have no problem playing with like friends who I had been friends with when I was younger, because that relationship was already established. It was just mostly establishing new friendships from about, I'd say, 5 to 7 that was really difficult for me. But I think a big thing that was really good was when I started being homeschooled. My parents decided to join the South Delta Home Learners group, and everybody there was just like really open and friendly, and like made like the kids there like made a special effort to like interact with me. So, and that made it a lot easier to sort of make friends.
Which is great. And I think you also mentioned something really important, that when you do homeschool children, a lot of people have this perception that the child basically stays in the house with the parents and that's all they do. And I'm sure there are some cases where that happens, but your parents enrolled you and got you involved in a homeschooling group with other children. So you do have an opportunity, even though you're homeschooled, to socialize with other children in the district. Which was, according to you, a wonderful experience for you.
Yeah, that was very beneficial for me, I think.
And that's you as a teen. And I know that now you're 22 and an adult. How do you find you've changed since a teen?
I know this is very broad and generic. I think I've become more mature. I think I take criticism more easily. I think I'm a little bit less petty.
Yes.
I mean, not that I was like super petty as a teenager, but I'm kind of more able to just let things go.
And I know a lot of adults who are typical that could use that skill of letting things go.
Yeah.
And can I ask you a question? I know a lot of people have told you this before, but you don't look like you have autism. You seem quite typical to everyone around you. Does that question bother you, and does that statement bother you?
It doesn't bother me. I would say, I mean, I don't want to say I'm high functioning autism, because that just kind of sounds weird, and like there's a like hierarchy with like all the lower ranked autistic people like reporting to me and me sending them out in horn flanks, and no, that's not the word I'm looking for. Anyway, but I do struggle with autism symptoms a lot less than other people. And I think if you're very familiar with autistic symptoms,
Yes.
you would probably be able to tell if you spent a significant amount of time with me over, when I'm tired or whenever. But Sometimes I'll just like do like ninja moves in the living room because ninja moves are awesome, and I'm like, whatcha? But I'm not sure if that's an autistic thing or if that's just me being really weird thing.
Well, no, I do yoga moves in my living room too, so I don't think that's necessarily an autism thing at all. But no, that sounds really interesting. That's in the privacy of your own home, and I totally understand. Because anyhow, no, I just thought as a person with autism, if that question would seem offensive as well.
No, not really. I mean, some people are or display more symptoms than others, and that's just sort of a fact of life, I guess.
Yeah. Now, another question. I know myself as a parent have said often, if I can just have 10 minutes in my child's head, that would be wonderful. Could you, or is it possible for you to give a parent like myself some insight as to how you see the world?
I'd say that's kind of difficult to answer just because I don't really know how you see the world. Like, if I've only ever seen the color green and you've only ever seen the color red, I can't really describe what green looks like from your frame of reference of red because I don't know what red looks like.
And you want to know what? I think that's a really excellent analogy, and I actually hadn't thought of it that way. And I suppose I'm asking for the impossible. Is if I was colorblind, I would certainly love to be able to see the color green. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to, but I'm still going to try. And another question that I had: since you were homeschooled, how was that for you in comparison to the time that you spent being in school? What was the difference for you?
It was kind of lonely at times because we did do a lot. We did do a lot of things with the South Delta Home Learners group, but I was mostly on my own. I think it was the correct decision for my parents to pull me out of school just because I was getting really stressed over my inability to interact with other kids, and that was really bothering me. So I think that decision was the correct one. That being said, when I did go back to high school when I was 16, I loved it. Everyone was really nice. It was great. I made tons of friends, so...
And I think that's really hopeful as well, that sometimes parents out there might just have to pull their children from school for a spate of time where their child is finding it stressful. And I think to each his own. And what I loved is the fact that you said because of all the skills that you learned at home being with your parents, that by the time you went to high school, you had learned skills where you were able to then meet a ton of friends and succeed in high school really well, which is great. And what would you like your teachers and fellow students and educational assistants to know about working with children with autism? Is there any message you would have for them?
The only thing I can really think of off the top of my head is, like, when I was younger, like, I worried I may have given the other children the impression that I didn't like them because I didn't go spending time with them. But no, you guys were cool. I just sort of didn't really know how social interactions worked.
And you want to know what? I think that's really a good statement because because you're very, very bright, and I know you're quite knowledgeable about an awful lot of material.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I just know this of you. And sometimes people might have the word aloof in their head. Would that be an accurate statement about what some people might have misinterpreted about you?
I'm not sure if another 6-year-old would use the term aloof.
No.
But I imagine I may have given the impression that I wasn't super interested in playing and such, but I wouldn't say that's the case now. I think I'm fairly friendly, and
oh,
most
absolutely.
people probably wouldn't describe me as introverted.
No, absolutely not. No, I think it's absolutely wonderful what you're saying. So that if some people or some parents are with your child, who the child is more isolated out there, it's not necessarily because they don't want to play with other kids. It's they lack the skills to be able to do so. Is that a more accurate statement?
Yeah, I mean, largely. And I'm sure there are autistic kids out there who just prefer to do their own thing, but that wasn't really the case with me.
And what fond memories do you have of childhood?
Oh, so many. I remember going to the aquarium and Science World when, with my mom when I was a kid, and we would play pirates, and, I would play with kids in my neighborhood, and we would climb trees and play, like, imagination games, and, me and one of my very old friends would go skating at the skate rink, and like she would like get me to like hoard all the other like little toys and act as her enforcer.
And it sounds great. Basically, what your parents sounded like they did is took you out into the community and exposed you to many different experiences, which you look back now fondly.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important message out there too, is that for parents that don't necessarily believe in taking your children out, I think what Zachary just mentioned is really, really important, to expose your children and to bring them out regardless of where they lie on the spectrum. That to expose a child to things like the aquarium or playing pirates or climbing trees are all part of childhood. And as Zachary said, he looks back on it really fondly with that, which I think is wonderful. And how did you develop your theory of mind? Like, I know you're a wonderful actor, and I know to be able to be an actor, you need to have that. So how did you develop it?
I think I've always been, well, not always, like, obviously I didn't really have a theory of mind as a baby, but as long as I can remember, I think I was aware that other people had their own thoughts and feelings and motivations, so that wasn't really something I can recall discovering at any point.
Which is good, because which just goes to show that some people on the spectrum just automatically have it. And what would make life easier for you?
Probably lower housing prices.
And being in the Lower Mainland, I'm sure many can agree with you. Absolutely. And I think that's a typical problem. I think what mine was referring to really was specifically you yourself.
Toward, like, in regards to autism?
Yes, in relation to autism.
I think I've mostly got it figured out at this point in my life, actually. Like, I mean, I'm still not super good at detecting sarcasm, but apart from that, I think my social skills are pretty good.
Absolutely, they are.
So, I think I've managed to work through most of the autism challenges I've experienced when I was younger.
And it's really clear to anybody that knows you that that's an obvious statement. And what do you love about having autism? And if you could, would you get rid of your diagnosis?
I think that's kind of an interesting question, because it depends on how you define autism, I guess. Like, if you just go with the strict, like, definition, it's just a thing that makes socially interacting more difficult. So, in that case, I would say there's not really anything I loved as a child about interacting, or that I loved about having a difficult time socially interacting. But like, as to, I mean, I guess autism is probably a biological, inheritable thing. I mean, I'm of the understanding that we're still not entirely sure what causes it. So I guess it's kind of like, if I didn't have autism, would I still be me? Because in order to not have autism, I would have to have a different genetic structure.
Absolutely.
If genetics is indeed what causes it. But if the question is more like, would you have preferred not to have had a lot of trouble interacting with other people as a young child, I'd say that is also kind of tricky, because I think that's largely defined who I am today.
Yes.
But so in a way, if I hadn't, I wouldn't be me. Identity theory is very complicated.
And you want to know what? And I can relate in the sense that my disability is dyslexia. And I know that they say people with dyslexia have a tendency, because of their dyslexia, to, because of the way that they've had to cope with it, typically, is that they develop better skills in other areas. And those areas become quite developed and strong. And I, as a dyslexic person, I'm really happy that I've gained the strength in those areas, and I'm quite successful at those. However, I think what you're trying to say is, but to have gained those skills, it's dyslexia that brought me to having those wonderful skills. But not knowing how to spell words for an awful long time is really quite challenging. So would I have loved to been able to spell? Absolutely. But would I trade them in for developing these skills that I developed because of having dyslexia? I don't know. So is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it also kind of changes whether you're talking about, would you want to not have autism retroactively, as opposed to, like, if you had a child and you could remove those autism symptoms in the form of having difficulty interacting with others, would you? Because I think I would. I think it's kind of a bit like asking, okay, Zach, if you could have had the opportunity to live as a millionaire in Miami with tons of friends, and you would be a lot happier, would you? I could say no, probably, because then I wouldn't have had all my friends and experiences growing up, and my identity as a person would completely different. So if you gave me a time machine, I probably wouldn't do that. That being said, if it's like, hey, Zach, you just won $10 million, are you going to give it away, or are you going to move to Miami? I'd be like, well, I mean, I wouldn't actually move to Miami because I have, like, friends here and such, but
yes.
I'm not going to be like, oh, well, no, I'm going to give that away because I have, like, theoretical poor children in the future, or not poor, but middle-class children in the future whose identity would be erased, because the identity of one theoretical child in the future isn't really any more objectively important than the identity of another theoretical child in the future.
You want to know what? I've come to the realization of now I absolutely understand why you're studying philosophy, because of that answer is absolutely one that I think we can all think about and theorize on and ponder to great detail. But I know this is a 30-minute interview, and I do want to get to other questions as well. So what do you hope for others with autism in the autism community?
I really just hope that there's increased sort of research and development among ways to make people who have difficulty communicating verbally and face-to-face with others as, or finding new ways for them to communicate. I think, ironically, or I'm not sure if ironically necessarily, but the advent of text messaging and Facebook and Twitter and all sorts of, well, not really so much Twitter, but social media in general has probably been a big help on this. I mean, I don't
Yes.
know. I'm just theorizing, because if you're texting with somebody, you don't have to worry about their facial expressions. You don't have to worry about their tone of voice. You don't have to worry about their body language. You just have what they're saying in front of you, and maybe there might be some emojis in there, but all in all, it's much simpler, which I think makes communicating for people who have trouble figuring out or keeping track of facial expressions and body languages, or body language and tone of voice at the same time, a little bit more difficult.
Absolutely. And I think what you're
Or
saying
a little bit more easy, I should say.
Absolutely. And I think technology in general has been a real benefit to people with autism, because things like iPads where people can communicate on. And I agree, text message, it's a blessing or a curse depending on if the person can actually read the intent of the other person on the other side. And I agree, it keeps things simple and clear to the person who's actually reading the message. And why do you believe autism is a gift? Or do you believe it's a gift? What's your take?
I wouldn't say it's intrinsically a gift. I mean, I know there's that guy who has autism who was able to draw, I think, an exact replica of Rome in half an hour or something.
Name.
Yeah, I mean, and that's sort of amazing.
Yes, absolutely amazing.
I don't know if he would have been able to do that if he didn't have autism, if that was sort of just a bit of a trade-off, if you will, in his brain chemistry, his ability to sort of interact with other people was sort of inhibited, or with the benefit of having superior memory and spatial recognition.
Yes.
That being said, I'm just going off of what the medical whatnot association says autism officially is, because there are people who don't have autism who can do similar things.
Yes.
So, and I don't know, I think there has been sort of a narrative within the sort of autism community, if you will, hey, we can do lots of cool stuff, and
yes,
we're good at things sometimes. And I don't really think so. I think autistic people can definitely be very good at things and live happy and fulfilled lives, but I personally don't really see autism as a gift so much as it is just a challenge that some people can overcome, and that helps them grow and become stronger people.
Yes.
But it's also a challenge that a lot of people unfortunately can't overcome, and that sucks for them. And I think that's why it's important that we keep doing additional research so we can help those people live more happy and fulfilled lives.
Absolutely. And what are some of the challenges that you faced in society, and how did you overcome them?
Again, for me, I had a lot of trouble focusing as a kid, but I'd say the main one relating to autism was just interacting with other kids, really.
Okay, and you can relate very, very well, and you can interact really, really well. And I think it must have been a gift for you to be raised with two parents that completely understood and worked in the field. What are your future goals?
Really just to get married and have kids. Like, nothing super special. I mean, I'd like to become an actor, but the work isn't especially frequent, as I understand. And I think if I am gonna have a family one day, I prefer to be doing something a little bit more safe, if you will.
Absolutely, and stable, and I can get that. I mean, I know many actors and performers, and you have to have a strong constitution for the uncertainty of employment, I believe, and I can completely relate. And I think having a goal as to wanting being a husband and a father, I think those are really brilliant goals, and I don't think there's any greater calling than to want to be a father for the next generation. And I think any woman lucky to have you is fortunate, and I'm sure both of you are going to lead a really great life. And who's your inspiration?
Oh, I love Meryl Streep.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, just especially her work in the Doubt movie. That was just awesome. Like, just super great.
Well, you did go for the highest actor possible, going for the one that I believe has the most Oscar nominations. Or
Yeah, she's got like 15 Oscar nominations or something.
I don't know, but Meryl Streep is a classic choice, and I couldn't agree more. And as a female, I concur with that answer. And are there any final thoughts that you would like to tell our audience that we haven't yet mentioned that you want to basically tell them?
One thing I'd just like to touch on is sort of the idea of wanting to cure autism being the equivalent of wanting not or autistic people to not exist, which I don't think is a very fair argument. That's like saying wanting to cure polio is like wanting people with polio to not exist. It's just, I mean, I don't know, it seems a bit odd, and in a way I can sort of understand and sympathize with that thought process. Like, I know there are a lot of people who are challenged by their autism symptoms much more than I do, who sort of go through life feeling that you're just inferior and it would have been better if you didn't exist. And and that sucks, and I can sympathize with that. That being said, there are also a lot of autistic people in their 30s who just can't talk.
Yes.
And a lot of them probably live pretty miserable lives. And, their parents and siblings and the people who love them are forced to see them go through this. So I think the trend of wanting to dismiss people who want to cure autism or find a cure for autism as a hate group, while I do understand the sort of emotions and the situations that would drive those feelings, I think it's important to realize what other people are going through, because as I mentioned earlier, like, for a lot of people, autism, or the challenges you face having autism, is something that you can overcome and makes you a stronger person. But for a lot of people, I think it isn't, and it just makes your life miserable.
Okay, so is what you're saying, people with autism, there are two camps, what you're saying. There's the one camp that don't want autism to exist at all, and they want to get rid of people with autism. And then there's the other camp who want to research and try to develop ways to help people with autism, ease the symptoms of autism and find research to eradicate they don't know exactly what it is, but to eradicate autism from a person's, they don't know if it's genetic or not, but genetic line, hypothetically speaking. And what you're saying is that there needs to be tolerance and understanding, of course, from both camps, and empathy towards everybody, and they're not mutually exclusive of one another. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, this will be an unusual reference perhaps, but have you ever seen X-Men 2? Or no, X-Men 3?
No, I haven't.
Okay, you didn't miss much. It wasn't a very good movie. But in their scene, there's a bit where they develop a cure for mutants, and a lot of the X-Men are like really up in arms about that. And Rogue, who has the ability to absorb people's powers by touching them, but that also kills them a little bit and basically prevents her from having any sort of physical intimacy in her life, runs in and is like, is it true that they can cure us? And Storm, who is the woman who can shoot lightning and generate whirlwinds and has really no downsides to her superpowers whatsoever, says, no, it isn't, because we don't need to be cured. And I thought
nice.
That was kind of an apt example, I guess. And again, I feel kind of odd because a lot of the people who have are opposed to curing autism, if you will, struggle with autism a lot more than I do. So I feel a bit odd, sort of. I don't mean to chastise them in any way, but the other thing I know is that it's not the people who struggle with autism the most who are advocating for not curing autism, because the people who struggle with autism the most can't talk.
Yes, and they can't communicate as well because they don't have the means or understanding. I love that imagery, and now I feel like I have to go watch the movie.
Okay, just watch like the first 20 minutes. Like after that, you can just turn it off.
I will certainly do that after this
I
interview.
don't want to be on record encouraging someone to watch X-Men 3.
That is noted. And you want to know what? We've come to the end of our interview, and I really want to ask you, Zach, is what would you like the world to know about autism?
Just that people with autism are people, and we have thoughts and feelings and desires, and it's a very broad, and if I'm being blunt, kind of poorly defined disability, I guess. Or, I mean, I know there's some controversy about calling it a disability, but, you know. And I guess that, I mean, like you said earlier, like if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism, and it's very difficult to gauge what someone will be like if they have autism. And yeah.
Absolutely. And I think basically what you're saying too, correct me if I'm wrong, I think what you're trying to get at is that everybody is different, but everybody wants to be accepted and treated with respect in society.
I'd say that's fairly accurate. And one more thing is, again, I'd like to reiterate, if someone with autism acts aloof around you, there's a good chance they do like you and do like hanging out with you. They just
absolutely
suck at social situation.
And you want to know what? I think that's a really excellent point to end off. So if you notice that somebody is acting rather aloof around you, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not interested. They probably do really want to interact with you. They just don't have necessarily the skills at that time to do so. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, that was my experience. Like, I'm not really can't speak for others.
And you want to know what? I can just say that your parents with their work. I think have done an absolutely incredible job, because I know, having spoken with you and interacting with you, many of the classic autism symptoms and what you're talking about clearly are not visible, and your coping mechanisms are very strong, and you lead a very full and active life and have a strong friend group, and you're working and going to school and achieving really all of your goals, and you have the skills and know-how of how to do that compared to the person that you were, let's say, at 4 or 6 years of age. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up my parents, because I just wanted to throw out this at the end. My parents and I are different people with differing opinions on multiple issues, including this. So for those of you who have listened to their podcast and mine, if you feel like shooting them an email like, your son said this and I don't disagree with, I mean, there's a good chance they disagree with me as well. So
and I think that's another testament to your parents, because really who they've raised is an independent, free-thinking man who is able to formulate his own decisions, and that's just another testament to them raising a strong and independent boy, or man, should I say.
Okay.
So, Zach, I want to thank you for joining us today on Autism 30. It's been an absolute delight and pleasure.
Okay, thanks for having me.
I hope you've enjoyed our podcast with Zach, and I hope that you've learned a little more about one of our amazing community members. He is a delight to interview, always entertaining, and always gives you food for thought. I know as a parent, to see his growth and development, and to see how he's grown into such an independent, free thinker, mature adult who is taking on the world with style, gives hope. I'm confident that not only is his future bright, but also those who have the pleasure of his acquaintance will be filled with joy. Once again, this is Tally telling you to live in love.
Hey yo, I'm an autism awareness angel, making sure my wings protect the different, the stranger than